I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 70. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Jenna.
And this week, so this episode will come out on Friday and we're recording on Tuesday, but this week, the 22nd through the 28th, is National Eating Disorder Association Week. So today we're going to talk about just some important statistics and facts around eating disorders and just create a place for us to have open and honest conversation. Obviously, we're going to be doing that with each other, but so that anyone listening to this, it can kind of hopefully spark some discussion. That's the goal. And just cover some helpful tips around things that aren't very helpful that we commonly see on social media and just general comments that get made that can be very triggering for someone. So yeah, my brain is also like not working very well today, so I'm gonna do my best. I was thinking like for the past 24 hours about really the thing I want to highlight the most. And sure, we could just like read through statistics and like that stuff, but I'm pretty sure we've already done that for one at some point on our pod. But I am like, why is it so hard to talk about eating disorders? Like, that's what I was thinking about, because I remember before I really like chose this as my specialty to pursue, it being such like a terrifying, and not that it isn't terrifying, but such a stigmatized and taboo subject. And I think as a society, we're starting to get a tiny bit better about talking about mental health. So the thing is that eating disorders are a mental health diagnosis. And I think that's the number one misconception is people don't realize that this is an illness. This is not a choice. You certainly can make choices that if you are predisposed to getting an eating disorder can lead to that, but nobody like gives themselves an eating disorder. That's not how this works. And so this is a mental health issue, just like nobody chooses to have depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, PTSD, you name it. And that just calling that what it is, I think is one way to start to bring that barrier down into conversation. I think we don't like talking about things we don't understand and things that can scare us. And I also think that it's scary to talk about eating disorders because diet culture is so pervasive, and I would imagine a lot of people are worried that they have disordered tendencies because it can really get defensive for someone to be poked around this because it's really easy to be in denial about it, which is understandable. But I think my biggest thing, like I said, is just wanting to have open and honest conversation around this, because that's how we can get people help. And that's how we can do our part to not further contribute to the problems our society has with diet culture, which are very related to eating disorders. And that's like our entire mission of this podcast.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to kind of add on to what you were saying about like, why do you think people don't really talk about it? And I don't know, do you have like a set answer as to why you think that is? Or do you think that it's just because like mental health is something that is now just being a topic that people are actually openly talking about. Because I think especially with like, I think our generation is doing a better job of kind of acknowledging all of that. But I definitely know, and I feel like just from like conversations with like people in older generations and like family members, like mental health is not something that was really addressed. Like it was something that was kind of seen as like, if you have an issue, it's shameful. And even like seeing a therapist is something that I feel like a lot of people in an older generation, it's like seen as like,
Yeah.
oh, if you do that, like then there's something wrong with you. And I'm glad that, you know, people our age are more open about that, and pursuing that as an avenue of like help, because I don't think it's been until like somewhat recently that there's more like freedom in talking about it and pursuing that.
Yeah. No, that's pretty much like my thought on it. It's just, you know, when you just take a step back and you're thinking like, why are things like this?
Yeah.
And the more and more you learn about something, the harder it is to remember when you didn't know how to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it creates this like weird, almost level of frustration for those that have a hard time talking about it, because you're
Yeah.
like, this is not hard to discuss. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean people, I'm not even talking about people like that are actively struggling with an eating disorder. I'm thinking more
Yeah.
just like, because that obviously, but I think then too, it extends to loved ones can be in denial about these things, and just
Mm-hmm.
it is scary. Um, it's just a bummer.
Yeah, I agree.
And so this week obviously has a personal meaning to me because I have a history with an eating disorder. And I also want to say too that people with clinically diagnosable eating disorders, that can get into treatment are not the only ones struggling. And any level of disordered eating that is impacting your ability to function and actually like enjoy your life, um, that we're referring to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you're suffering less if you don't have a diagnosable eating disorder, because there's also problems with the diagnostic criteria that are can be really exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about this, like, yeah, certainly there are some things that are happening with genuine eating disorders that are not happening with dieting, but disordered eating as a whole is very destructive. Um, there's just kind of a line that gets crossed at a certain point. So, um, I'm going to read, I'm referencing the National Eating Disorder Association um, often in this podcast because just over and over, I find they have the most like easy to access resources and they're always doing something. And so I'm going to read a definition of what eating disorders even are. So, eating disorders are serious but treatable mental and physical illnesses that can affect people of all genders, ages, races, religions, ethnicities, sexual orientations, body shapes, and weights. National surveys estimate that 20 million women and 10 million men in America will have an eating disorder at some point in their lives. While no one for sure knows what causes eating disorders, a growing consensus suggests that it is a range of biological, physiological, and sociocultural factors. Um, so, this definition is really vague, but
Mm-hmm.
because honestly, the science of studying eating disorders is so new in comparison to a lot of the medical field of things that have been looked at. And I'm lucky enough to work at a facility where one of the doctors is like one of the first people to be like starting research and treating eating disorders, and it's really crazy to think that like there's someone still living on this planet that was doing all that work because it's that
Yeah.
recent.
Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah. So earlier today I was looking at something on Instagram and I came across someone defending giving out nutrition information around how to eat quote unquote healthy and saying how this doesn't cause disordered eating. And inherently, I would say, yes, this is true. I was slightly concerned that this person felt the need to defend themselves, because I'm wondering, what are you perceiving that you needed to defend? Because if you are, okay, so people can choose who they follow on social media. Like, yes, we have a choice, but we've talked about how our diet culture is like pop culture, magazines, like television, it's everywhere. And part of everywhere now is social media. So if you have I'm not even going to call out just random influencers, and not because I don't think that people can't have help to offer if you don't have credentials, but just for the sake of my argument, I'm going to talk about people who are like certified in some capacity to be a healthcare worker or just work in that field, like Jenna and myself. And if you have that and you're perpetuating diet culture, that is problematic, because even outside of developing an eating disorder, we know that weight stigma negatively impacts our health. So it's disturbing to me to see people defending what they're promoting, because, like, where is that rooted?
Mm-hmm.
And if we look back at that, like, in depth, I can't fully speak for anyone, but my experience of watching people and just knowing my own brain from when I was really disordered, it's stemming from a really unhealthy place and from fear. So there's going to be a lot of stuff probably that comes up this week because, one, people are up in arms because they don't want to think they're contributing to this with some of this awareness going on. And also, there's a lot of healthcare professionals and non. There are people treating eating disorders that have absolutely no business treating eating disorders. But also, like, as a dietitian, no one can stop me from treating eating disorders because I have those
Mm-hmm.
qualifications.
Yeah.
Ethically, I shouldn't be without pursuing the proper education, having the supervision, blah, blah, blah. And so I think it is important to consider where you get information from, and not because I'm trying to procure like my financial future, but because I know that like 2017 Danielle, coming right out of my internship treating eating disorders, was not like, sure, I'm a great person and I don't know that I made them worse, but I also don't know that I was helping anyone
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And no one is regulating that. So, and I'm just one of the people that could like come in connection with someone who's trying to get help that could be perpetuating harm, and I have credentials. So PSA, look for people who actually have, and like vet them out. Like,
Yeah.
don't just look at one thing, like research the people, so that you know that you're in safe hands if you're seeking treatment or even just like help for disordered eating.
I'm glad you said that. I feel like I've seen a lot of that on social media the last 2 days also.
Do you want to talk about some of the stuff that you put in the doc around that, since we're kind of on that topic?
Yeah, like the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw a post earlier, I think it was this morning actually, that was touching on some comments that can be made by other people that you might think could be helpful or encouraging to someone, but could actually, in reality, be incredibly harmful for someone, especially if it's someone who is like either currently struggling with an eating disorder or someone who is recovering or even recovered. So I'll start off by naming or like saying the phrases that it should be that we should all be cautious of and be mindful of when we are commenting about other people and like trying to make comments about the way that they look, which is something that I think we need to try and be stepping away from in general anyways. But the first one is the comments such as, you look healthy or great. And I think I love that you said at the beginning, we started off with the blanket statement that an eating disorder is a mental disorder, because I think, yes, there are some people that you probably can look at, and yes, you know that they're struggling with something, but I think even more than that, there's probably the population who you really can't tell that they're struggling with something based off of how they look physically. And so I think it's just super important to be mindful of that, because like most times people do look fine to the outer eye, but like these comments can be like incredibly invalidating for you to tell someone like, oh, you look fine, which if they know internally they're not fine, but if they have people in their life being like, oh, you look healthy, you look great, you look fine, when in reality, like they're really struggling with something, it can be a huge trigger for them.
And the frightening part about that is that if someone is trying to maintain a lower weight because they've been told for their BMI, because they've been told by our culture, because the people closest in their lives, especially women, but not always, tend to make comments about their body size. If you're maintaining a lower weight and not eating enough to nourish your body, which is, you know, dependent on your height, activity level, and like your genetic makeup of what your body is supposed to be size-wise, that depends. So not everyone can have the same caloric intake needs. If you're maintaining that through behaviors, you're going to look to the outside world like our culture wants weight loss to be happening, and you're commending someone who may very well be, and I've heard countless stories about this, and you're reinforcing someone's literal mental illness, because why do we feel the need to comment on other people's bodies? It's just it's harmful. Either like any way you do it.
Yeah. And by saying something like that to someone who is internally really struggling, you're basically reaffirming that fear of gaining weight, because you're telling them they look great exactly how they are. And so if internally they're like, well, I need to like get healthier, but like someone on the outside is literally confirming that like if they gain weight, they're not going to look healthy or great. And that can just be incredibly harmful and even keep someone from seeking help if they're kind of like on the borderline of like trying to decide what route they want to take and if they want to like pursue healing.
Yeah.
So just something to think about. If you
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say something to think about if you feel the urge to comment on like someone's body.
And if that's triggering to you to hear, because when I was learning about some of this stuff, I was like, why blah 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 can't I? And like, just take a second. Like, you, first of all, you don't have to agree with us. There is like a method to the madness though behind these things, because of what we know about weight stigma and just like overall consistent research and statistics around how this crap is harmful, and also hearing stories from people over and over about it. Like, take a second and think about why is this bothering me? Why does it bother me to not be allowed to comment on other people's bodies? And there's likely some internalized fat phobia that you are dealing with, and that takes work. So I think, like, sure, feel your feelings on it. And if it's like, if you're listening to our podcast, you probably care about this stuff, and it's worth taking a second to really like think why it's poking you. Because it's certainly not going to be productive in the long run for you or anyone else to get angry about that and then kind of get stuck in the way of doing things like this because you're feeling like shit for potentially hurting someone. Like, I think that like fragility is further harmful. So like, take a second to like think about it, because me and Jenna both have done that work. Like, everyone we know that wants to help people heal had to overcome their own biases and do their own healing. And so when you're just hearing us talk about this stuff like today, it's okay that if you're not there,
Yeah.
and it's important if you want to move forward and for yourself and for others to do that work.
Yeah. Another statement that it was saying could be potentially dangerous or harmful to someone is something as simple as saying, I wish I had your discipline, or anything along those lines. And I get how, like, from the outside, someone could be like, well, I don't understand how that could be harmful. But if you're saying that to someone, again, goes back to the first comment, like, who is struggling with an eating disorder. The eating disorder isn't really about discipline, self-control, or even willpower. It's actually a loss of control, because the eating disorder is what is controlling. And so that statement can be dangerous, again, because it's coming across as something that's admirable. And so if this person, again, is trying to heal or trying to, like, make progress, by you kind of reinforcing the fact that, like, oh, their discipline as a parent, and, like, you're admiring that, it's going to be that much harder for them to break away from those habits and doing what they're doing that makes them come across as discipline, when in reality it's incredibly consuming and all controlling, to have to have what's going on because of the disorder.
And that becomes such a point of pride for people who are struggling, because you can't continue to harm yourself in that way, even if you don't think you're harming yourself, which I think there's often a lot of loss of insight on that part even happening. But, like, you can't keep doing that if you don't think it's benefiting you in some way. And so, like, to get external reinforcement from that too. And honestly, like, discipline is another one of those words, just like laziness, that I'm not super into, because they have very negative connotations for me. And, like, I get it, but also we can kind of reframe those things, or just avoid making comments about other people and what they're doing and what they look like.
Yep. Another one is saying something along the lines of, like, oh, well, I thought that only happened to fill in the blank with, like, your typical stereotype. And so I think it's really important to note that, like, this can happen to anyone, regardless of their gender, race, religion, size, health, class. Like, there is no, like, it doesn't have, like, eating disorders, they're not picky. They don't have, like, a type that they go after. And I think there's this misconception in society that, like, only a certain type of person or a certain race is going to struggle with a certain eating disorder. And that's where I think
thin, white middle
women.
to upper class women.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think there needs to be more education on that as well, because there's a huge group of people who aren't receiving help, or even being, like, there's no attentiveness to them or, like, care going towards them, because they don't fall within this stereotype. And so we're failing a lot of people because of that.
Yeah. And that is, like, so many areas of society. Yeah. I'll let you keep going.
Okay. I got like two more. Okay. The fourth one is making in-depth, detailed comments about even, like, your own body image or diet to someone else. And I get that we are all very self-consumed humans. Like, that's just how we are. We think about ourselves probably more than we think about other people. So it might be, like, a natural tendency to start talking about what you're doing, or, like, what you're eating, or whatever it is relating to this specific topic to people. But that's going to be incredibly hard for someone to, if you're saying those comments to someone who's trying to recover, because, like, if you're commenting and talking about, like, your own desire to lose weight and, like, what foods you're avoiding, or, like, what diet trend you're hopping on, that right there is going to continue to reinforce those disordered fears, values, and delusions for the person who is struggling and maybe receiving it. Or you could even be saying that to someone who isn't fully, like, walking towards an eating disorder, but, like, just by, like, hearing comments like that, like, and that's not to like blame anyone, but like you just never know, like your words are so much like more impactful than you think. And so you can just like completely avoid the potential of like causing someone to like go down that path or just continue in destructive behavior by you just not talking about it.
Mm-hmm. And there certainly is like the flip side of this coin of people learning how to hear things that can be triggering and cope. The
Yeah.
problem is that that kind of work isn't going to happen until someone is like stable. And when someone's not eating enough,
Mm-hmm.
and whether they have a full-blown eating disorder or they're just generally functioning at low energy levels and kind of skating by because they're starving themselves,
Yeah.
that's not good. So certainly, yes, we as individuals are responsible for ourselves, but the whole thing is like this is a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's anything we can do to help decrease harm to others, I think that it's worth being educated on this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last one that I have is the comments such as like, oh, well, just eat normally and like you'll be fine. And it's there's like so many things wrong with that, but like it's not as simple as that, especially because for people struggling, there's not really a sense of normalcy. Like they walked away from that a long time ago, and like it's not as easy to just be like, oh yeah, just eat normal. Like there's so much more that goes into it. And so while people might think that that's like a helpful comment, that is probably one of the more harmful ones because there's like so much that goes into that.
And also, I would like to know if I like polled a bunch of random people that aren't like in the healing relationship with food, body, exercise realm, what would they even define eating normal as?
Normal, yeah.
It's hard to define even within this scope. So
Yep.
like that's tough in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, super not like helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love stuff like this because I personally always want to learn about
Yeah.
ways to be. And of course, like every person is going to be different as far as things you say to them, which we understand, but there's like general like moving in the direction of healing as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember who posted it?
I can get it up for you in like one
Okay.
second.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to share some statistics that I find particularly important. There's a lot of them, but these are ones that stood out to me in preparation for this episode. So, in a large study of 14 to 15-year-olds, severe restriction caused them to be 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder, and even moderate restriction caused them to be 5 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. So, the reason that I point this out is because while eating disorders do not discriminate, this teenage years are like the most likely time, and even into 20s, that kids are going to develop eating disorders. And we can't blame dieting or blame toxic households or blame, because it's all of these factors. But in my mind, the first time I ever saw that about being 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder, I was like, then why bother? Because what is it's a cost benefit analysis to me. Like, first of all, we know that dieting fails, like intentional weight loss fails
Mm-hmm.
95+% of the time. We have that statistic if we're looking at like
Mm-hmm.
5 years out from that. Like, we know this number, and we know that this can cause people who are genetically predisposed to develop an eating disorder, which is a life-threatening mental health condition. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of mental illness.
I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah. So if we can prevent that, like, duh. Is it really worth, like, trying to pursue the skinniest pair of pants you can put on to ruin your life? Like, and that's not on kids, I don't think. I think it's on people who have the ability, and not that kids can't impact the world, but like, it's on us to set, like, to make change for that, like, for future generations, for our children, for our younger siblings, like, to change the course of this so that we can have less and less instances. And also, I want people to get help before they get to a point where they're on their deathbed from an eating disorder. So those two, and then I have a couple more. All right, so when presented with identical case studies demonstrating disordered eating symptoms in white, Hispanic, and Black women, clinicians were asked to identify if the woman's eating behavior was problematic. 44% of clinicians identified the white woman's eating behavior as problematic. 41% identified the Hispanic woman's eating behavior as problematic, and 17% identified the Black woman's eating behavior as problematic. So I know it is, like, I'm not talking about this stuff because I'm trying to be on trend with the social justice and, like, movement we've had in the past year, but this is a real problem. Like, clinicians aren't seeing the symptoms in Black women, and that's not okay. So we really need to get it out of our heads that it's just the white women that have access to the people that are going to help them. They're not the only ones struggling. So 1 in 3 people struggling with an eating disorder is male. I think that's also surprising to hear. And then another one that really stands out to me is that transgender college students were significantly more likely than members of any other group of college students to report an eating disorder diagnosis in the past year. So, like, to Jenna's point of, like, eating disorders don't discriminate, we do as a society, but but mental health does not discriminate, and this matters. And I think we just, like, we have to keep talking about it.
Yep.
NEDA has been doing some really incredible things, like always, but this week they have roundtable discussions going on. Let me get to the link on that. So there's one that's live from yesterday on Black mental health, eating disorders in the Black community. Today, insights from the LGBTQ plus community. Tomorrow, voices from the higher weight community. Thursday, for caregivers supporting ourselves while supporting others. And then on Friday, everybody has a seat at the table. So they're like 50-ish minute videos. And I think that's incredible to look into, whether or not that relates to you specifically or just because you want to get more education. Like, I'm going to watch all of these because I think that's huge. Like, go to the source of people that are having these experiences, listen, and then we also combine that with, like, people who've been studying this, and then we can make moves. At least that's my hope with all of this work, is to help people find healing. So yeah, I just can't stress enough, like, check NEDA out and all these resources. That's NEDA, and I'll put the links to this stuff in our episode description. Did you find that?
Yes. Yeah, it was, her Instagram handle is Feel Good Dietitian, and her name is Lauren Cadillac.
Oh my gosh, she's the one who I have her flashcards, and I use them all the time with my patients, and it's so lovely.
Yeah, she's
Shout out
great.
to Lauren.
Yeah, she has some good
Yeah,
stuff.
I'll put the link to her stuff in our episode as well.
Yeah.
She has these I'll just give her a little promo here. She has free excuse me, they're not free. You have to pay for them because she worked hard and deserves to be paid for them. These flashcards that are called feel good flashcards, and they're like for working towards body neutrality and acceptance, and food freedom. And so they're really beautifully done with watercolors and just have these statements on them. And the idea is to like flip through them to like work with your brain to shift your thoughts, something that we literally talk about in this podcast like every single episode. And they're really amazing.
That's so
And
cool.
yeah, so I use them to, because I can't unfortunately afford to give all my patients a deck of these cards. I use them to like lay out for people who are appropriate to like find some things that resonate with them to kind of use as a mantra and kind of shift into some of that work of what they're working towards in treatment. And yeah, I'm really glad that was her that you quoted because I'm obsessed with her resources.
Yeah.
She's so
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Okay, cool. So those are my main. I mean, this is something I could literally talk about for hours.
I know.
But those are the things that, like, in preparing for this, kind of came to my brain as being what I wanted to discuss to kind of highlight just the awareness aspect. I think that's all I have for today.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, cool. So lots of great resources to check out, lots of things to ponder, lots of conversations to have and to continue having. Anyone who is listening, who is struggling and wants to get help, NEDA, first of all, if you just go to their website, they have multiple resources. Like there's a call helpline, there's a chat service for like being able to get the resources of like where to go and the like direction. You can also like look for providers from your insurance if you have insurance, and do some research around those people and if they work with eating disorders. Even if you don't believe that you're going to have an eating disorder diagnosis, but you're struggling with your relationship with food, I highly recommend like finding a provider. And it's not easy, which is also another problem with access to care, money and lack of providers, but finding one who has experience and doesn't promote weight loss, and use language around that, but uses more health at every size, weight inclusive, body acceptance, like that kind of language, because like there's certainly a spectrum of behaviors and severity of behaviors that get used with eating disorders and disordered eating, but like if you have a person that knows what they're doing, you're going to be in safer hands and someone that can actually further perpetuate harm, and not because they're trying to, but because they haven't done the work to know how to work with that population, and to best support you. And always remember that, and like again, this is an issue with access to care. Providers work for you, so you can fire them if they're not helping you. And I will say one thing that's come out of the pandemic that's positive is the amount of access to virtual care now. So take advantage of that. And if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, hit us up in our DM, on our shared Instagram page at FitFueledFree. Send us an email, fitfuelfree@gmail.com. You can find what Jenna and I are up to on our personal Instagram pages. Mine is at Dietitian Dani Cast, and Jenna's is at JenEpFit. And we always appreciate you sharing our podcast, ratings and reviews, and we love to hear from you. So thank you for listening today, and we look forward to talking to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.